right, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for finding time to join us right here on Your World. My name is Winnie Lubembe, and we continue with this very big week. And this is as far as the Africa Climate Summit is concerned. A declaration was made yesterday, and of course, the Africa Climate Week continues up until tomorrow, if I'm not too wrong. But again, today we just want to sort of like analyze what happened, the declaration that was made yesterday, and do you feel that they delivered or not? What are some of the conversations that missed out as far as the summit is concerned, and what does this mean as far as Africa's position? And this is come COP28. Do we have enough ground that is to negotiate? All right, so that is what we want to understand today, and that is on the deliberations that were made yesterday. So is it yay or is it nay? So again, what do you feel about the same? Do you feel that they delivered or not? Send your feedback on our socials at NTV Kenya, both on Facebook and on Twitter, or you can call us live, and our lines are officially opened, and tell us what you think, all right, as far as the deliberations, and what should have been said, all right, what emphasis or what areas should have been emphasized more as compared to the others. So my name is Winnie Lubembe, so much to cover, very little time, and hour is very short, all right, so let me just dive straight into it, and to introduce my guest. On my immediate left is Amos Wemanya. Right, Senior Advisor, PowerShift Africa. Good to have you this morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's my pleasure to be here. All
right, and we're happy to have you as well. And next to him, we have Thandile Chinyavanyu. I hope I said that right. I'm trying. Good to have you this morning as well. Climate and Energy Campaigner, Greenpeace Africa. Good to have you all the way from South Africa. I was asking you this morning. I hope we're treating you right.
Yes, yes.
And last but not least, we have Joab Okanda, who's a Pan-Africa Senior Advisor at Christian Aid. Good to have you this morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Okay, first question, first order of business, and that is your comments as far as the deliberations, the summit, first of all, as a whole, and then we'll, narrow it down to the deliberations. So what did you make of the summit? Did it meet your expectations? And then we'll talk about the deliberations in a second.
Yeah, I think the summit was a great moment for African leadership to come together and develop a common agenda for the continent around building resilience to the climate crisis. We all know the amount of impacts the climate has had on livelihoods, on our communities. So this was a great moment. We had great expectations that for the first time, African leadership is coming together to determine a climate agenda for the continent. But I think the outcomes after 3 days has been underwhelming in terms of what we have seen, although not official declaration, but what is in circulation at the moment, I think is underwhelming. But what the summit has achieved is it has awakened the African climate movement. It has awakened people's awareness around what is at stake on this climate agenda. We have seen how the summit was framed and what it means to our communities and to our well-being. Through this summit, we had a People's March that was organized by civil society, and it brought together over 1,000 people marching from Nyayo Stadium to Green Park. And we have had a People's Declaration come out because of this summit. So what this summit has achieved is to mobilize a climate movement across the continent. But in terms of the declaration, I don't think it has met our expectations.
Absolutely. I'll come back to you to understand. So what exactly did you expect from the summit and deliberations as well? Again, Thandile, what do you make of the summit in itself? Because again, the inaugural summit, we had high expectations. Everybody was happy that, I mean, we have, such a conference, rather, summit, that brings together people from different, parts of the continent. So we had expectations, right? But you as a person, and of course as an organization, what do you make of the summit and the deliberations?
Well, of course, initially it's an amazing opportunity for our leaders to demonstrate the potential of Africa to be a strategic leader in decarbonization. And of course, we did have high expectations because it was an opportunity to change the narrative about Africa and position us as a partner in decarbonization, even given the share of responsibility that we have. And so there was a lot of excitement about that and what could possibly emerge. And indeed, it left much to be desired. The fossil fuel subsidies are conspicuously absent, the phasing out of them are conspicuously absent from what's in circulation. And this is very concerning, but we'll continue to look forward and see what they're able to bring. But definitely as civil society, our outcome from this is the movement building. We have been able to, it's demonstrated in that march that there's a movement starting that can't be contained, and that's what we'll take away from this summit.
Absolutely. I mean, the phasing out versus phasing down, a lot of people are really angry about that. Yes. Why aren't we phasing down instead of, no, why aren't we phasing out instead of phasing down? And I think the big question is, what will it take for us to then phase out completely? Because I know this is also a big conversation during COP27, so we look forward to see what happens before COP28. But again, John, for you, what was it like?
Yes, this was a great moment for Africa, and all of us were happy when actually the dates were announced for this summit, because this was an African Union decision back in 2019 to host this particular summit. And we were glad when His Excellency President William Ruto came on board and took this as his mantle, you know, saying we have to deliver this, we must have this conversation. But the outcomes of the summit have a little bit been underwhelming, considering the draft declaration that is in circulation. We haven't seen, no one has seen the final draft yet. And so from that draft, I think the draft has done well in exposing the structural inequalities that exist in the global system, the global economic system, and how Africa and the African voice is undermined in global economic decision making. But the summit has not done well, as projected in the declaration, in providing those specific prescriptions in solving the context that it has done well in analyzing. And these are things that Africa and developing countries have been speaking about for decades now.
Okay, all right. So to be fair, I mean, some conversations were had, important conversations, right? I mean, the whole aspect about loss and damage, those commitment as well, the $100 billion annually. I mean, those are emphasis about mostly financing, but what you're saying is you had expectations as far as what really had to come out from the deliberations. And this is not the first time we're having a Nairobi declaration, right? We had a Nairobi declaration in 1990. Right, and a lot of people are trying to figure out, so what's different, you know, from that document, the 1990 Nairobi Declaration versus now the 2023 Nairobi Declaration. But again, so what is it that needed to be said? What actions needed to be taken? Because the president said, and I just want to quote what he said, because I wrote it down and I felt it's very important. He said that we're determined to hold difficult conversations, take hard decisions, and make uncomfortable changes. 3 really powerful words from, you know, the African, you know, Union heads of state as a whole. But again, yes. So what is it that you expected to hear or to come out from the summit? Yeah,
I think for a very long time, Africa has served the interests of others. Okay. So what we expected, and when the leadership was speaking about having uncomfortable conversations, was a bold outcome. But the way the summit was framed to begin with, it was problematic. Okay. You've spoken to the issue of loss and damage, but we framed this summit as though we are not suffering the impacts of the climate crisis. And we offered ourselves to lead the world in providing solutions. But what did we put on the table? We put on the table our resources to be auctioned through markets. Okay. We did not add any ambition to the discussion. You talked about 100 billion. This is very usual calls in all the climate negotiations that we have had. When we talk about facing down coal, that was determined at COP26 already. So there's no ambitious call that has been made in this summit. And you would imagine that African leadership calling everyone on the table to determine a future of the continent. We were ready for bold discussions and bold outcomes, not the usual discussions that we have had in other spaces where we have struggled to find a footing. This was an African summit where Africa would stamp its position and determine how Africa was going to engage with the rest of the world. So when the draft declaration that we have seen speaks to this forming a common position of Africa in COP28, I do not agree, because these discussions, the declaration might be a little bit moderated, but the discussions we have had prior to the summit and during the summit have been about markets. Some of them have gone against the principles and common positions that Africa has held for a very long period, that being common but differentiated responsibilities. We want to say that we have equal responsibility as US. I think we are being wrong on that. So this cannot form an African position at COP28 because it has already contradicted very many of Africa's positions. We have for a very long time negotiated for a loss and damage fund, and we finally got the fund set up in Egypt last year, although it doesn't have resources yet. But that was a big win, especially taking place on an African continent. So for this summit to be framed as if we are not suffering losses and damages out of a climate crisis that we have contributed the least to, I think that was problematic. And this declaration and the conversation that have happened in Nairobi cannot definitely form a common position for Africa at COP28.
Yeah, I mean, the president was saying, listen, it's time we stop the blame game, right? Global North have done this, and therefore Global South, we need compensation, we need all those things. And he was saying it's time we approach this from, investment, right? Let's all put our heads together and say, so we're here. Right? We're all facing the brunt as far as climate change is concerned. What is it that we can do? What is it that the Global North can do? What is it that the Global South can do? And then now the deliberation is here, the declaration rather is here. So I wonder what you have to say, John, very quickly before I come back to Thandile. What do you make of that? Like, let's stop the blame game. Let's come together, join our heads, and make sure that we get solutions. But at the same time, also sort of like contradicting, themselves as far as the declaration is concerned.
Thanks. I think the summit focused, he spoke about the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And that's the principle that underline climate negotiations. But the focus of the summit itself focused only on the common part. We are in this together. Let's come together and find a solution, which is important. But then that absolves those who have caused the crisis. John Kerry came and pledged $30 million. For Kerry to fly all the way to come and pledge $30 million
from a country that
it's like
among the top emitters.
It's quite a joke. It's a big joke. That translates to around $545,000 for each of the 55 African countries. But for me, it also tells you the structures that have been feeding into the summit itself. When you read the draft declaration, you see the first commitment that African leaders make is to develop and implement policies to attract investment. We've been developing policies, we've been implementing policies to attract it. Why now? Why is it that that's the first commitment that we're talking, that we are making as African leaders? Secondly, in such declarations, I think language matters, and the text that is used matters quite a lot. We are talking about how the global financial system has been unfair to Africa. But we don't bring that unfairness language or calls for fairness in the deployment of resources. We talk about better deployment of resources. So if, for example, the declaration calls for issuance of $650 billion worth of SDRs for climate action, and we know that in 2021 the IMF issued $650 billion worth of SDRs, and out of the 650 million, for example, 60 billion, Africa as a whole continent got only 33 billion. And this is because of the structures, the governance of the international financial architecture. If you say control find in that draft declaration, and such IMF, it's not mentioned.
Yeah.
We talk about governance of multilateral development banks. The IMF is not an MDB. So language matters, and those are critical issues. Why are we not talking about just the governance of international financial institutions so that we incorporate the IMF? The declaration actually puts Africa as a market. You know, we're ready to exploit your resources. The strategic minerals that are going to spur the transition to renewable energy are all in this continent. The declaration is silent about how Africa can harness, can come together. Already the rest of the world has come together and formed a club of critical minerals. Why is Africa, where the highest percentage of these minerals are, not coming together to say, this is how we want to strategically utilize our minerals and be the leader in the energy transition agenda, because we have all the resources, all we need is the finance, and this is how we can unlock that finance.
I see that. And Thandile, I want you to speak on, again, one of the things that you said should have come out very clearly is the whole aspect about fossil fuel, right? And phasing down versus phasing out. But what else did you expect to hear from the summit and the declaration as well? That is very important and very critical. I know there's so many young people who again took to the streets and say, listen, you're not including us into, you know, some of these conversations. We have our own declaration, we have our ideas, we have solutions. But then again, you only include us the last minutes of the same. So what else did you expect to hear that is very critical when, you know, when you're talking about the global north versus the global south, and where Africa needs to put their foot down and say, you need to do this, otherwise this is not going to happen?
I think the expectation is something definitive that is focusing on people as opposed to profit, centering people in solutions, building and viewing people as infrastructure and building their capacity to be able to drive solutions on the continent. But ultimately, what was observed is that those that are the most responsible for the climate crisis are the ones that are willing to deny, deflect, and deflect responsibility altogether. And we saw that emerging, particularly with the carbon offsets, and that was something that was not an expectation that it would feature so prominently. And I think what was clear is that it was quite an exclusionary space, as is often the case with these kinds of summits. But I think the expectation was that it would be conducted in an African way, open and accessible to Africans to be able to contribute towards this space. And ultimately that hasn't emerged. And we need to be a lot more, we need to start seeing a lot more incorporation of African voices in these spaces and prioritizing people before profit. Before profit,
yes. I mean, someone was saying, and then especially when we talk about carbon credit, you know, someone was saying, so then first of all, who has this money? Why is it that we allow these other people to create all this mess, and then us we're here saying, listen, we will take care of your mess as long as you you pay us. I wonder what your stand is on the same. Should we just leave it to them to take care of the mess as we focus more? Because again, from the global north is more of mitigation, and for us here at the global south is more of adaptation, right? So yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, the whole thing around carbon markets is permitting the polluter to continue polluting, and they give you crumbs, peanuts, for you to for them to feel good also that we are reducing emissions. But when actually carbon markets does not help reduce emissions, and we are faced with a challenge here. Science has been very clear that if we do not act and act urgently, we are on a trajectory where this world will become inhabitable. At 1.1 degree temperature rise, we have seen what has happened here in Kenya. Communities are losing livelihoods. People are being displaced from their homes. In South Africa, we had floods kill 100 of people. We have seen that across the continent, the cyclones, and this is only at 1.1 degree temperature rise. And science is warning that we are on a trajectory of 2.7 if we do not take urgent and bold action. So I don't think we should be investing in false solutions when we are faced with a challenge of this magnitude. Also, to speak to what I expected from this summit, Africa has been engaging in an extractive engagements with the rest of the world. So the bold discussions I was expecting from this summit is that we need to shift from Africa just being a supplier of raw materials to the rest of the world. You remember last year when Russia invaded Ukraine and Europe wanted to win off Russian gas. There was an energy crisis in Europe and everyone dashed to Africa to strike deals on how to exploit Africa's gas to be able to replace the Russian gas. But we all know that Africa has had an energy crisis for a very long time. We still have hundreds of millions of Africans who do not have access to electricity. When this is happening, no one cares about investing in Africa's energy resources to be able to meet the needs of African people for modern energy
Anything
services.
they want to think, whatever little that, that is there, it explodes. Okay.
Now it's now being taken away, and these gas developments that we are seeing currently are not for Africa; they are for export. Look at the Uganda, Tanzania, East Africa crude oil pipeline. Where does it end? It ends on the coast, and that means we are just extracting our continent. That bold outcome that I was expecting is to have a plan so that we industrialize our continent based on our own resources, so that we stop being suppliers of raw materials to start producing our own equipments. Joab mentioned about critical minerals. Why would we have to export raw critical minerals for equipments to be developed elsewhere and then we import them back expensively? Why can't we produce these equipments at the source where we have the resources and we can supply finished products to the rest of the world and help the rest of the world decarbonize? So those are some of the bold outcomes I was expecting from this summit, but it fell short of that.
All right, it was not bold enough.
Not,
like you expect.
It was not bold at all.
At all, not even enough. Yes. Okay, Job. So then, should we have like sort of like set ultimatums? Because again, like we have one of the biggest carbon sinks, right? So should we have set ultimatums and say, listen, if you don't take care of your mess, please do not involve us in any of this, you know, carbon credit, carbon market business, you know, that the global north is so focused on? Or what is it that would qualify as bold, you know, statement, given what the president was saying, that we need to make tough decisions?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and as we said at the beginning, is that the summit was framed more as an investment summit. And that's why, you know, you see investments language in the summit, including carbon markets. And most of the pledges that have been made in this summit speak to carbon markets. And that in itself is problematic. What does that mean for the community-owned land? What does that mean for agriculture? What does it mean for a forest? Someone was doing an analysis, for example, on the 2 gigatons that were discussed in this summit. And what that means for a forest is actually means that the 2 gigatons worth of carbon every year means losing 5% of our forest every year. So we need to really look at some of the issues that we commit to as African leaders. Because for me, the priority will have been, how do we feed ourselves as a continent? How do we deal with those structural traps that make us import 85% of our food? Yet we are busy talking about growing coffee, growing flowers for export.
For export.
Is it so that we get the foreign currency we need to import the food? Why would a crisis thousands of miles away impact on our food security? Those are the questions that we should have asked ourselves. The summit talked about, you know, supporting smallholder farmers who are actually feeding this continent. But there are no concrete actions on how the smallholder farmers will be supported to enable Africa feed itself. If we can't feed it ourselves, then we have no reason to exist. During, you know, during the colonial time, Africa was feeding the rest of the world. We need to ask ourselves what changed from the 1960s. Why all of a sudden the policy to grow cash crops don't subsidize your farmers, yet the rest of the world is heavily subsidizing farmers. Yeah. We need to go back. I mean, the European Union was represented here and said it wants to be an ally, it wants to be a partner. There's already an Africa-EU partnership, and you know, so some of these things, and we need to interrogate, for example, how the EU Common Agriculture Policy impacts on our own food security, and start saying that we have to deal with this. This is what is causing us a problem. We need to look at, you know, the summit talks about, the declaration talks about dealing with tariff and non-tariff barriers. We need to interrogate. That's why is it that the US subsidizes farmers, and when we come back home, we are told don't subsidize your farmers.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We need to take a break. And Tandile, I don't want to give you like 30 seconds to have a conversation, especially on food crisis. We had a farmer yesterday, one of the smallholder farmers yesterday here on the show. And excuse me, the thing is like, he said, very powerful, and said, listen, some of these farmers do not even have a hoe, like a djembe, right? Cannot even afford that, which would be like ideally to 5,500 shillings. They do not have that. So how are you telling them to invest in smartphones? Smartphones, we're talking about, you know, smart agriculture and all those things. Very powerful statements he, you know, he made yesterday. But I also want to hear from you, Tandile, in terms of food crisis, because we're dealing with that, you know, as a continent. That was not mentioned from the summit, and you also talked about you know, exclusion. A lot of people felt we were not included in such conversations. So what exactly is the impact of that? I do not want to give you 30 seconds to speak on the same. So we'll start with you when we come back from the break. But again, the question is, did the Africa Climate Summit deliver on, you know, declaration, all right? And given where we are now, and the declaration that we have at the moment, do we have enough ground as far as negotiations are concerned come COP28? That is where we'll also pick the conversation from after the break. Stay with us. This is Your World.
Your best skin with Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion, now with 5-in-1 complete care. The deeply nourishing formula prevents your skin from drying with precious cocoa butter and deep moisture for smooth and healthy looking skin. Step out in confidence with our most complete care from the world's #1 skincare brand.
Benefits of ordering with Glovo. Glovo allows you to order anything you want at the comfort and convenience of your home. Craving fried chicken, or pilau, or pizza? Easy and simple. Order on Glovo today. Glovo, order anything, we deliver in minutes. With Glovo, you order anything unataka, and when you get it una celebrate because kukuchoma imefika, na wakati keki inafika ndio sherehe inaanza. Order Glovo, will deliver in minutes.
Let's clear pimples. Step 1. Acne's Creamy Wash is a foamy and gentle cleanser that removes sebum and dirt in the pores. Step 2. Acne Soothing Toner maintains skin pH. Step 3. Acne Sealing Gel quickly clears pimple-causing bacteria. Mentholatum Acne clears, cares, and helps prevent pimples. Roto.
Right, welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, and it's all about analyzing, you know, the deliberations that came and the declaration rather that came from the Africa Summit, which again was given yesterday by the over 20 heads of states. Were here, that is African heads of state, were here in the country to discuss and forge a way forward, really, as far as the Africa's position is concerned when it comes to the global crisis, as far as climate change is concerned. A deliberation is out, and as you were saying, we do not have the official declaration. All we have is a draft. So we don't know whether there will be changes here and there, as far as we really hope that there would be, really, because according to where we stand now, we're not too sure. But again, so we're trying to analyze. So did it deliver? Did it not? What are some of the areas that missed out? What are some of these important conversations that should have had, and hard stance positions as well, as far as Africa is concerned? So what missed? And of course, the biggest question is, do we have enough ground as far as negotiation is concerned come COP28? But before that, Tandile, food crisis. We're dealing with it at the moment. People are dying, people are starving, children are wasting away. But that conversation, again, did not come out clearly during the summit. So I wonder what you think the impact of, first of all, was this sort of like a deliberate, attempt to completely miss out on this very important thing? Because if people are hungry, it doesn't matter how many summits you have, nothing will come out of it because people do not have food on the table. So I wonder what you have to say as far as this very important aspect as a result of climate change is concerned, missing out from the summit.
Well, that omission is glaring, especially considering the fact that we have climate change driving famine in the Horn of Africa, and this is something that should have been the top of the agenda. But it's quite possible that it was not an omission that was made by a mistake. As we've seen across the continent for years, that agriculture and the mining industry have been in conflict consistently, and unfortunately extraction has always won. And as he mentions that, this summit has been positioned as an investment attraction, and our desire to drive developmentalism has led to us not prioritizing people. This is not the People's Declaration ultimately. And the biggest concern is that we're seeing, as we mentioned, the offsets and how that could possibly impact food security on the continent. Like, large parcels of land will be auctioned off in the name of carbon markets, displacing people, but primarily taking arable land that could potentially be used for agriculture and feeding people on the continent, and rather using it to sequester carbon or to drive these offset projects. And it's not what the people want. And we had a discussion, and an economist raised that he believes that this is the carbon markets have the potential to feed back into communities. And what's important to note is that communities know exactly what they need. What communities want is ecological agriculture. They want food sovereignty. They want to be able to have food security and focus on agriculture that allows them to share their seeds, trade seeds efficiently, to be able to share in this market. But unfortunately, they're being sold a false solution, and the idea that we're going to be able to benefit from this is false. And we need to overcome this fallacy that extraction holds the key to our development. We need to overcome this fallacy that we are not a center for agriculture and food sovereignty to be able to thrive. And so what was clear is that the fossil fuel companies were able to buy access at this conference, and we need to be able to push back against that and fight for food security to be on the agenda going forward.
I mean, totally hear you. And again, like I said, we had a farmer here yesterday, and he talked about, first of all, yes, you say investments should be made in terms of empowering smallholder farmers, because they contribute a lot, right? And he was saying, yes, fine, so you bring us fertilizer, but then it's the same fertilizer that's also killing women. It's killing the farmers, because again, the content is not safe. So you're bringing in fertilizer, but you're also not empowering ourselves to understand. They said you need a mask, you need at least to have gloves to handle that very safely. And he said, first of all, why should we export rice to import rice? Which made a lot of sense. That should not be happening. We should first of all be able to feed our people before exporting the surplus. But I think it's usually the way around, and you also mentioned the same. And you also talked about exclusion. we had a lot of people, and even one of the people close to my heart is the Sengwer community, the indigenous communities, who also felt, excluded from these conversations. So Tandile, when we talk about effective inclusion of all these parties, I mean, they might say, listen, we might not have enough resources and, space and all those things to include everyone. But at the same time, what is the impact of the same? And that is excluding very key players when we talk about climate change and even the preservation of our environment as well. What is the impact of the same?
The impact is that you come out with a declaration that's myopic in its vision, and ultimately participatory action research has that potential that you're able to source the information from the communities who know best what they want, and they understand very well and are very able to articulate that. And unfortunately, that's what we've seen, is that there was not a prioritization of those communities. There's not a prioritization of indigenous knowledge and what we can learn from communities that have experienced and witnessed the changes that have been taking place in the environment and the climate over the years. So I think we looked too much towards actors that have their own vested interest and not enough at the interests of Africans that have our lives at stake. That is our primary interest at this point, is the sustainability of these communities, and that was overlooked. And the error with not taking a bottom-up approach and sourcing information from those that are most affected is that you come out with something that is just a technocratic approach that does not create meaningful change for people on the ground.
Yeah, and in summary, you're saying, again, you exclude them, they become rebellious. So the next time you go and ask them for solutions, it might be too late, because they're like, we did not matter from the word go, so then why are you coming, to us now? And so very quickly, can we interrogate the People's Declaration versus the declaration that was made by the heads of state, see some of the areas and the gaps, and then again, we'll also now jump into the conversation of, do we have enough ground when it comes to negotiations, come COP28. You were saying, first of all, we should not even use this declaration at all. Yes. Come COP28. But again, People's Declaration versus the declaration that was made by heads of state.
Yeah, I like it when Tandile said that the corporates brought themselves into the summit. So many key voices were locked out, especially Kenyans who had been accredited. In the end, they did not get the badges to attend the summit. And this triggered the people to come together and discuss their climate future. So the activities that took place outside the summit were overwhelming. They were great. And if you look at the People's Declaration, you find out that the key issues that should have come out in the summit are coming out in this
the People's
Declaration. And that tells you that if you involve the people, then we are able to come up with solutions that we need for the crisis that we are faced with as a continent. Among them is food sovereignty. We had sessions where farmers talked about ecological farming, their practices, and how they are owning their own food systems away from the corporate capture. And while at the KICC, the corporates were announcing big money. I had that in total there was an announcement of $23 billion.
Yes.
This happens in every convening. That besides the key issues that we need to be discussing, the corporates come to distract. They announce this big money, but they don't tell us the details. We saw that at COP26 when the first Just Energy Transition Partnership came out. Instead of participating in the multilateral process of finding a solution to a global challenge, we had a few come out and say, we are giving South Africa 8.5 billion for it to move away from coal. But no one knew then what this 8.5 billion entailed. Much of this money, you find that it's loans, high interest loans, that are going to put us into much deeper debt. So we should not be celebrating such distractions. What we should be focusing on, we should focus on the goal. And if you look at the People's Declaration, you find all the key issues, including increased investments in Africa's renewable energy resources for universal energy access, are captured in there. You find that of all the investments that go into renewables worldwide, Africa only receives about 2%. And this is for a continent that has many people without access to electricity, but rich in renewable energy resources. So this should have come out clearly in the summit, that this needs to change. That instead of dashing for our gas and putting resources into our gas that is not for our benefit, that's not going to facilitate energy access on the continent, please, we have great resources in renewables that you can shift this finance into investments in Africa's renewables for people's access to energy. So all this is captured within the People's Declaration. Issues around energy sovereignty, food sovereignty, industrial policies that are going to help Africa to move away from traditional exporter of raw materials. All this is captured within people's discussions and people's declaration. And we had several sessions where communities, where people came together to define their climate agenda, to define their future. And if these people only could have been offered a space within the summit, we couldn't be talking about a failed summit.
It will be one happy continent from the summit. So then the biggest question is, and it's important that you know, people came together and said, listen, fine, you have your summit at KICC, that's okay, not okay, but well, you know, here we are. But we're going to have our own, you know, meeting and talk about some of the things that we need that are important and some of the solutions that is there. The biggest question is then, what will it take for the People's Declaration to be adopted? Because again, like we said, we just have the draft. We don't have the official declaration yet. What will it take for the People's Declaration to be adopted so that we don't just sit here and say, yeah, the people said, the people, you know, gave their views and opinions, and then it dies there, and yet some of the things that are not important but not so important should not, you know, be at the top of the list, you know, goes ahead, you know, passes through.
I think these declarations are made on behalf of the people, and our leaders need to listen to the people. They need to listen to the voice of the people. Something is happening on this continent, and people are saying nothing about us without us, and leaders must listen to that voice. And so leaders, I'm sure some of them have seen the People's Declaration because it has been shared with the leaders. It has also been shared, including leaders who are going to host the critical summits, like the SDG summit that the UN Secretary General will be hosting. The People's Declaration has been shared with him. The People's Declaration has been shared with the COP28 president, who will be leading the discussions at COP28. And so, and it has also been shared with African leaders. And we also need to ask ourselves, you know, I was just asking myself yesterday, we were told this number of heads of state will attend the summit, but we didn't see that number, you know, of heads of state that that were announced. And also at the signing of the,
like half of the heads of states representing the continent.
But also at the signing of the declaration, I don't know how many heads of state were present. I think the number reduced significantly.
Yes, some had to leave.
And we need to start asking ourselves, you know, why that? You know, is this really an African leaders declaration? Because there have been complaints about the West hijacking the summit.
And even the side events.
Yes,
well,
you know,
over 60%, 62%.
62% of the side events were hosted by the Global North, and this is an African summit. We thought that our friends from the Global North were coming to witness Africa's vision,
take a back seat,
but not to take over Africa's vision, not to veto African ideas. You know, you find someone from the Global North sitting on several panels, and you don't see an African leader in any of the panels. You know, for certain presidents to abscond this, is this the reason why they absconded? And for the declaration to come out the way it came out, was it deliberate? Does it speak to that hijack that many Africans have complained about? You know?
And so as it stands, it's like we do not have a, you know, united voice as far as our stand as the African continent is concerned. So again, my biggest question is, do we have enough ground for negotiations come COP28? I want to hear from you first.
Well, yeah, already that's clear that we've failed to achieve that objective to lead up to COP as a bloc and come with a common solution.
Yeah.
And if leaders are not present in those spaces ratifying it, then it's clear that they're not buying into this. So that's quite, we're already on the back foot approaching the next COP negotiations, and that's something that we need to be conscious of. And I think as well, something that's important to really stress as well is that the food security issue, what was missing there, we really needed to make those tough decisions that we were promised would be made. And ultimately that needed to be a phase out of fossil fuels and phasing out subsidies of fossil fuels, and we didn't see that coming out in this declaration. And so we're already on the back burner in these discussions, because what is clear here is that if we're not owning our transition, we will ultimately find that situation where we're taken along the way, and it's something that's dominated by the global north, and they will not take the back seat in that sense. So we need to ensure that we are at the forefront, we are owning this transition, and we are owning our negotiations at COP, and ensuring that people are prioritized in those discussions going forward.
Okay. So do you foresee a situation where the next year before the next COP, because someone was saying, listen, first of all, these meetings are just too much, okay? All these COPs, all these meetings in between, but we're still talking about the very same things that has been discussed in this meeting. So do we do away with the COPs and just focus on something totally different that will sort of like bring results? We'll start to see action as far as some of these conversations that have been had for a very long time with very little progress.
Certainly it is tiring to maybe to be discussing the same things over and over again, but it bears reiteration. And the reality is that this is an urgent matter, which is why it needs to be something that's on the agenda at every opportunity, and that we are convening as often as possible to ensure that we are doing something before we overshoot that 1.5 degrees Celsius target of 2030. And it's not that far off. In our minds it may seem so, but the impacts are already starting to increase in intensity and frequency. And the climate crisis is playing out violently. We can't afford to delay anymore. We can't afford to continue to have the same conversations. We need definitive action, and we need our government leaders to take those hard decisions. This was that opportunity. Unfortunately, we did not see that.
We did not,
But we continue to place pressure as civil society. We continue to place pressure as the people of Africa to ensure that at the next opportunity that we do take those chances and take those opportunities.
I really wonder what that will take. Should we do like matches there? Every country to do their own match, and people, sit and say, listen, no, it's either you do this or, we're not buying into what you're selling. And again, someone was saying, still in regards to a lot of meetings, very little, that come out of these meetings. It's like these people, first of all, they're the ones contributing to the mess, because they're using fuel guzzlers. They're using, the way they get themselves to these meetings, first of all, is contributing immensely into the mess that we're in already. But again, Amos, do you have enough ground? COP28 is just, less than 2 months away.
Yeah, I think, like I said in the beginning, that this summit has mobilized us a climate movement on the continent, which is something that I see as a success. And already Joab is mentioning the People's Declaration is being shared in different processes. I think this mobilization will be important as we head into COP28, that the people are coming together and realizing what is at stake for them, and they are now ready to engage, and we cannot engage enough. We need to engage at every opportunity, and we hope that this movement that is building will be able to, in a unified position, be able to work towards influencing COP28. But for the declaration that's coming out of the summit, I think as late as mid last month, when we were in Addis for the Africa Ministerial Environment Ministers meeting, the draft had not been shared with African environment ministers. Even the experts, Africa group of negotiators, could not be presented with a draft declaration so that they can engage with it and contribute to it. So this is a document that is rushed, a document that is not widely consulted, and I think this document will fail if we engage it in COP28. But as I said, we still have opportunities to engage and refine and develop a common position, African position. It's very important that Africa goes into these spaces from a united front. And the fact that the summit has failed does not mean that Africa is failing. It means that it provides us with another opportunity for us to go at it again. With this growing climate movement, I think we can make a difference.
But some might argue and say we do not have time, really. COP28 is just around the corner, right? And even the people, again, like you're saying, people are speaking with a common voice and saying, this is what we need. These are the actions that need to be taken now. But these are the very same people who might, chances are, might not be allowed into these meetings, right? So then that begs the question of the impact. You know, a movement is being created, which is absolutely fantastic. But then again, so empowering these people to say, you know what, whether you get yourself there or not, these are, you know, the avenues that we can take to make sure that our voices are being heard, right? So I wonder what that will take. So that come COP28, in as much as now where we stand is like we do not have a united front, really, as Africa and as a continent. But then for the people, you know, themselves to present their voices and their ideas, what will it take?
We cannot underrate the power of the people, power. Communities are organizing. And being able to forge their own solutions. And they are resisting false solutions. Last year, when the African Union Technical Committee presented gas as a suitable fuel for Africa, I think the African civil societies came together in hundreds of them and established Don't Gas Africa campaign. So the power of the people cannot be underestimated. Okay. So I'm glad that people are coming together. We have campaigns against these distractions that are being provided by those who do not want to see Africa prosper. But we also have communities coming together to find their own solutions. So all this is creating a ripple effect. So we cannot ignore the power of the people.
Yeah, the power of the people. It's not all doom and gloom. All right. Okay. Job, do we have enough ground? What will it take? What needs to change? So that come COP28, we have a very strong, you know, position as far as negotiating for the things that will help us as a continent, you know, when it comes to tackling climate change, adaptation, loss and damage, you know, all these conversations.
Yeah, thanks. I think I just want to echo what Amos has said, that we cannot ignore the people power. And not everyone has to be in the room. We need those in the room to carry the people's message.
Okay.
We need those in the room to bear the interest of the African people, not the interest of corporates who've plundered the continent for centuries now. Analysis has been done. There are clear solutions on finance, for example. In the declaration, for example, they talk about carbon tax, global carbon tax, although the word global, when you read the declaration, is bracketed. That means it remains contentious. It has not been agreed upon. A carbon tax, global carbon tax, is critical to funding loss and damage, for example. It's it's not included there, but there have been calls to reduce and eventually stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And there has been analysis, for example, if just the G20 countries, if they reduce their subsidies to the fossil fuel industries by 4% only annually, we'll be able to raise about $245 billion annually. Yet we've been talking about $100 billion for the last 14 years, which we've never achieved. And so these should be the innovative sources of financing. It shouldn't be the dangerous distractions that we are seeing with the carbon markets. There are concrete solutions, and this is what African leaders should be pushing for. The IMF and the World Bank is coming back to the continent 50 years later. The last time the IMF and the World Bank had a meeting in Africa was in 1973 in Nairobi. 50 years later, they're coming back. What are we going as African leaders to that meeting in October in Marrakesh? What are we saying? We needed to see a strong language on the reform of the IMF and the World Bank in particular, institutions that were set up way before any African country was independent. These are these institutions were not set for us, they were not set by us, and will never serve our interests. We need to find a way of reforming these institutions.
Yeah.
That's why we needed a stronger language from the Africa Climate Summit Declaration, that then African leaders, not just for COP28, but they go with it to the UN General Assembly that will be starting next week. They go with it to the SDG Summit that the UN Secretary General will be hosting. They go with it to Marrakesh, you know, at the IMF World Bank annual meetings. They go with it to COP28 eventually when it starts in December. So they should link up all those processes. And African leaders should also reflect, you know, on the commitment that they make, the very many declarations that they've issued, you know, since 1963. And just interrogate ourselves, how are we doing this? We've committed to invest 10% of our national budgets to agriculture. How are we doing with that? Is that the reason why we're not able to feed ourselves?
That's a whole different conversation. Again, like I said, one of the farmers that we had here was not really happy about how we're doing. So we literally have like 3 minutes to go. And given, again, what the president was saying on behalf of the African states. And one of the things, and I think you mentioned, is the fair playing ground for countries to access investments needed to unlock opportunities. And they also talked about a just multilateral finance architecture to liberate economies from odious debt barriers. So the big question is, what does the future look like? We'll continue to have these meetings, right? Even years to come, we'll still continue to have these meetings. The youth said, listen, if we do not do anything now, the world will be thinking, the world will be burning, and neither of you, I think we were addressing, you know, all the generations, and said, you will not be here, you know, to witness that and witness the impact. So then what exactly does the future look like as far as the African continent, our positions, as far as combating climate change is concerned, and what exactly does the future look like? Let me start with you, and then,
Thank you so much. The fact is that we cannot borrow ourselves out of the climate crisis, and something needs to be done. And Africans have the solutions, and they are ready to provide solutions. We need to transition to renewable energy, but that transition has to be just. In fact, the language of human rights is completely missing in that declaration. It's not mentioned at all. When we're investing in renewable energy, our communities losing their land. Our communities where these renewable energy projects are happening, are they having access to that, to the electricity? Or that is going to feed the urban centers, and our rural communities remain the way they are, disconnected from the grid, not having access to electricity. And so African leaders need to unite, and we hope that they learn lessons, because it has been agreed that every 2 years they'll be hosting an Africa Climate Summit. They need to learn lessons from this particular summit, how it was organized, who was feeding into the narrative that was being advanced in the summit. There's those structures that were feeding into that, and African leaders need to be bold. The energies we saw President Ruto at the Paris summit, we expected the same in this
energy,
summit. You know?
Not more. All right, I hear you. Tandile and it was literally 30 seconds each in terms of what the future looks like. Let me start with you, Tandile.
I think thankfully, due to the support that civil society came out in numbers, that it's promising. Grassroots movements, thankfully we've got like a number of examples across the continent where grassroots movements have led to liberations, grassroots movements have led to access to healthcare. They have the potential to change things, and so that's where our promise lies, in the grassroots movements and what they'll be able to accomplish.
I hear that. All right, and Amos, what does the future look like?
Africa finds itself at crossroads again, and every time previously we've found ourselves at crossroads, we've chosen others over ourselves. It's time for Africa to define its interests.
I hear that, and like you said, it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope. So I think let's just hold on to that hope that we'll have a better future as far as our continent is concerned and our son. So thank you so much for coming by. 1 hour is not enough. But this is a start, you know, of, again, conversations that we really need to have as far as climate change is concerned. So allow me to say thank you very much, Amos Wemanya, Senior Advisor, Power Shift Africa, Tandile Chinyavanu. I really like that name. Please donate. That's how we share needs. Climate and Energy Campaigner Group East Africa. Good to have you this morning. Thank you so much. And Joab Okanda, Pan Africa Senior Advisor, Christian Aid. Thank you so much as well for joining us this morning. And we hope that we'll see more of you. Please come back again to Kenya. We'll adopt you. So we can continue with you know, these conversations. But for now, thank you for staying with us as well until the end of the show. We have to say goodbye, but I'll see you tomorrow morning, 4 a.m. live. But until then, stay safe, God bless, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.